Hello and welcome to the Album of the Year podcast. My name is Kris, and with me to my right is, actually, it's an empty chair today, and that's just because Marty and I, this particular week, we couldn't really get our schedules together. I was traveling, and it's just kind of been a big mess, and so I almost just released this episode without recording anything at all, but I thought it made sense for me to just pop on real quick and give you a little bit of an idea of what to expect from this episode. So this is a lunchtime special. If you're a fan of Marty, don't worry. I'm a fan of him too. I'm not cutting him out of the act or anything like that. You're going to hear his voice in just a second. He and I recorded this particular episode at lunchtime one day. Those of you who are new to the podcast, you may not have come across one of these lunchtime episodes before. We're literally recording this on a couple of iPhones as Marty and I go to lunch on our lunch break. And the idea is to talk about some subject that isn't specifically tied down to a year or an artist or one of our other primary formats. In this particular episode, we talk about the role of the producer, and I really like this one. It's one of my favorites of these lunchtime episodes that we've done because we dig pretty deep into our knowledge of music making processes and stuff. And Marty and I both have slightly different opinions about production. And we kind of come at it from a couple of different angles. So I think I think you're going to really enjoy this one. So I think that's most of what you need to know. The only other thing that I would add is it's kind of fitting that this is an episode on producers because we're kind of monkeying with how we record these lunchtime episodes. I've always kind of had this thing about them where I love the format, but sometimes it's a real pain to edit because, you have all the crowd noise and everything like that, and it's hard to cut that out. And you have that situation where like one guy's really quiet and one guy's really loud, and so we're trying to fix that right now, and I think the end result's pretty good. It's kind of our wall of sound episode, so it's appropriate to me that it's a producer's episode. So I don't know, you be the judge. Tell us what you think at aotypodcast@gmail.com, and I really hope you enjoyed as much as I do. And with that, let's find out a little bit about the role of the producer in Lunchtime Episode 6, Producers.
92.
Yeah. All right, you ready to roll this?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's rock it.
Let's rock it, man.
Get in the car.
Let's rock it, man. Have you seen a trailer for that new Elton John movie?
I've seen a trailer for it. I think they may have a newer one.
Yeah.
What I saw, I thought it looked
I
pretty
think it looks good. I want to see it. I'm much more. I feel like I'd much rather see that than the Queen movie. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Queen is a lot easier to make into like just cartoons or whatever. And I mean, although Elton John's pretty colorful and stuff too.
You can do it for Elton John, but I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I'll see Rocket Man when it's in theaters, but I'm definitely eager to check it out at some point. Yeah.
The thing that's cool about it is from the previews, though, it's not like the Queen one where they just like everything's working up to the Live Aid. It's like there's touch tones. There's him playing at the Troubadour, and him playing that huge show in Dodger Stadium. That kind of thing. So I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be cool. Hey, everybody.
Hey, guys.
We're talking.
Sorry, we're just beefing about rock biopics all of a sudden.
Yeah, which is not was not today's topic, but maybe we just switch it up.
Yeah. Nah, that's okay. We'll stay on track for this topic. Yeah.
So, so lunchtime, obviously, today, you can tell.
Yeah.
But, you know how you can tell, man.
You know how you can tell. We're not going to say it anymore?
No, I'm going to say it next time, but this time we won't say it. How about that? We got to skip it.
Sounds good. We're going to skip it this time.
Okay, so...
Sounds good.
So, our topic for today, and this was just kind of hastily cobbled together, but the topic is producers.
Producers.
Something we've mentioned producers.
Yeah, we've thrown some names around here and there. I feel like there's maybe one or two producers we've talked about.
Time-traveling Timbaland.
Timbaland. Steve Albini.
Yeah, we talked about him.
He's come up quite a bit.
A couple times we mentioned my boy, Phil Spector.
Phil Spector, yeah.
Who's not really my boy, but he's definitely his producing is
his producing amazing. He's not so great of a person.
Yeah.
But,
so we've mentioned producers, but we haven't talked much about the role of the producer.
Yeah.
And I think especially I'm curious to get your thoughts from a hip-hop context. And then, I don't know, we'll just see kind of where the conversation goes. We'll probably end up talking about great albums and all kinds of stuff. But that's kind of the topic for today. Yeah. I felt like we could start by just doing like a base level, like what is a producer? You know, there's a lot of people who may listen to this podcast because they like music, but they don't know much about how the sausage is made. You know what I mean? Like, what?
I love it when you say it's the sausage you talk about the sausage being made.
Yeah.
That's great, man.
Well, I mean, that's one of the best metaphors I've heard about like how an album is made. It's like a sausage. It's better if you don't know how it's made.
What was that? The whatchamacallit, the documentary now, the Blue Jean Committee episode where they were talking about like their parents met at sausage school and stuff.
What?
Yeah, I won't get deep into it now.
Yeah, I've only seen some of that episode. I haven't seen the whole thing.
Yeah,
so,
well, they're all in Chicago and everybody's eating and making the sausage in Chicago, and they met it. The band members met each other at sausage school because like
it's a parody for those of you who don't know. It's a mockumentary. It's not real.
Yeah, it's not real, and it's like essentially the parents worked at the sausage factory, and the kids would one day work at the sausage factory. So instead of attending a regular school, they went to like a sausage-based vocational school, I guess. Yeah, we met me and Gene and Clark all met in sausage school, and I was on captain of a wrestling team, and I wanted to get all the girls, so I decided I was going to be in a band too, that kind of thing.
That's great.
Anyway, I won't dwell on that. It's just it's really funny.
Yeah, I do like the idea of a sausage-based vocational school. Well, I'm in meatpacking 405.
Yeah, I'm doing intro to casings.
Yeah. That is great. Yeah. Intro to casings.
Hey, Brad, you get that casings textbook from the bookstore there? Yeah. Oh yeah, I got it, man. It's good. It got some good stuff in it. We're gonna learn all about it in class today. All right, enough of my weird Midwestern accent.
I love your Midwestern accent though. Like you could do that the whole time.
Thank you.
Maybe one day I'll do like a baloney. My Norwegian accent, and then you can do the the Midwestern one, and we could just make that work.
That would be something, man. I'll tell you what.
So producers. Well, I'm glad that we've talked a lot about producers already.
I think we're done here. Really.
Yeah, we're done. I think
done.
The sausage
we can just
thing
go
pretty
eat
much
and not worry about this,
But so what is the role of a producer? Let's start with just describing what a producer is.
I think that the role of a producer can mean a lot of different things.
I totally agree.
Just by and large, if we're talking about broad strokes, it's
a producer, traditionally
someone in the studio that is there for the band's recording process of an album that helps guide them and helps kind of create their be an architect of their sound and that kind of thing.
Right. Traditionally, going back to the olden days, the producer, the best parallel is probably a director in a movie, right? Yeah. In the old days, a producer was somebody who the record company essentially hired and said, well, you're a safe pair of hands. We trust you to record this group or this artist, handle the arrangements, make sure that you get the musicians in the studio and everything like that. And we trust you to come out with a finished product that's in line with the record company's goals for this artist.
Right.
So just like a director is entrusted by their producers, actually, in a movie, and basically the faith is put in the director that they will make the movie that the studio has decided they want.
Sure.
It's the same thing for a record producer. Now, with a record producer, though, the role changes because artists, of course, have their own artistic vision for products, and that's something that they are, they manage. Sometimes a producer is kind of a co-producer, someone who helps instead of the record company's vision, they help attain the artist's vision. Yeah. And then sometimes you still have situations where producers are essentially the actual artist, and the whoever is actually on the cover of it, especially in pop music. A lot of times, whoever's on the cover of the thing, they provide their voice or whatever, but they're not really the one who is making the artistic decisions about the album. So, so producer can be everything from a Svengali to kind of a silent partner, depending on the nature of the music itself.
Sure, and I think when you talk about rock bands, I feel like a lot of producers almost see themselves as another member of the band, like we were talking about Brendan O'Brien in that last Pearl Jam episode, the No Code episode.
Or like Nigel Godrich with Radiohead, certainly.
Absolutely. And to some point, Jim O'Rourke with Wilco and
Yeah.
Sonic Youth kind of thing.
Certainly George Martin with the Beatles was often called, while he didn't chum around with the Beatles as much,
Yeah.
was often called the fifth Beatle because
Sure.
of the amount of musical, certainly from a musical standpoint, impact on their albums. There's no question
Right.
he's the, apart from the Beatles themselves, the most influential person on their Beatles sound.
Sure.
You know, so.
Sure. Yeah, man. Well, definitely.
So basically, big, wide open definition there.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing is that the producer can add a very distinct sonic signature to an album.
Yeah.
We're going to Demasi's again today.
Yeah. So we're, when I said the last time we went here for a lunchtime, we were buzzing, but it wasn't quite as loud as I thought it was, actually.
Yeah.
When I listened to even just the rough mix,
Yeah.
So,
Like I said, this is one where we can just walk right in and get down to eating.
yeah, so we're going to get down to it, and we'll probably trim it in post. But,
We'll see.
but yeah, man. Good stuff. Here we go. Rocking and rolling, my friend. All right, let's see what we got.
Is.
Eat that hummus.
You know it, man.
Oh, they got my chickpea salad. It's so good.
So, pretty much over time, there's a lot of angles we can talk about the producer as artists and everything, the way they use a studio as an instrument and stuff.
Yeah.
I think a place to start really is just talk about some of the great producers, the ones that matter a lot to us. We've kind of mentioned some of those names already, but who are some of your favorites?
That's a really good question. I mean, as much as the music I like, I don't know if I can name a producer that really just their work meant the world to me, And maybe I do, but I just don't know it,
Well, let's start with hip hop, just because. Start with hip hop because producers are often very. I mean, one of the roles of producers, and one of the great things about producers is that you can have someone who's a very talented artist, but who doesn't necessarily, isn't going to be able to get in front of a bunch of teeny boppers or whatever. They don't have what it takes to be the next, big artist, rap artist or something.
Yeah.
But they can create the beats. They can be involved in that, and so there's a room for someone to be a great artist and have #1 records when they're not. It's not their face on the record sleeve.
Well, if you talk about producers in hip hop being beat makers, then you obviously have J Dilla being first and foremost. I mean, before him, Pete Rock. Even Dr. Dre. Is also an influential producer.
Absolutely, I'd say one of the most.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think hip hop is a really good example of a genre of music where the producer is personified and is almost just as popular as the actual rap artist. The hip hop artist.
That's true. When Eminem first came out,
yeah,
I mean, it was a huge credibility boost that he was working with Dre.
Absolutely it was.
And so, I mean, in that first album, a lot of people were saying, well, hey, if it wasn't for Dre, this kid wouldn't go anywhere. And that perception changed over time, but it was very much, seen as a kind of Dre project.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, I would agree with that.
We mentioned Timbaland, and I keep bringing him up, but, people knew about Timbaland, but it was Aaliyah who was on the cover of the album, you know what I mean?
Yeah. That's true. And then Genuine, I think was the he was the artist that kind of made it possible for Timbaland to showcase his talents to the world and get his name out there.
Yeah.
Kind of funny that it happened with a guy like Genuine.
Yeah. I was listening to us talking about that, when Courtney went to see Pony or whatever, or got to see Genuine, and he was a little bit overweight and everything.
Yeah. Fun fest. We were just talking about that the other day.
Mm-hmm.
It was how many times did he play Pony? But, yeah, man. Yeah, I think that, I think that hip hop producers are responsible for not only producing great music, but evolving music in a way with samples and beats and things like that. You know, with giving new life to music that you otherwise wouldn't. I mean, we were talking about outsider music the other day, and
Right.
a lot of beats that, you know, were made by like Jay Dilla and Madlib and all those cats. I mean, they're sampling music that a lot of people haven't ever heard, you know, like majority of it. So that's a good thing, you know.
And they're kind of expected to have a breadth of knowledge about not just music, but also recording techniques. You know, like you expect to, especially if you go old school. You know, these are going to be guys who, you know, when recording was much more arcane, you know, knowledge, and only a few people knew it. You know, like they were, you know, they're not the engineer. Now the engineers are the ones who actually have to set up the mics and stuff, but they're kind of the ones who are responsible for the engineering process.
Yeah, for sure. They know the right engineers to get who will make them do what they need to do with the band or the artist in the studio, essentially. Well, there was a time too. Tony Visconti, are you familiar with him? David Bowie, the producer. He was interviewed once, and he was talking about being a producer in the 60s and 70s, and he said in like a lot of cases there were secrets. There were like industry secrets that other producers didn't want you to know. And he said he was talking to one producer. I don't remember the name of the producer or the recording that they were referencing, but he was basically like, "How did you do that?" And the other producer was like, "I'm going to tell you really fast so you won't be able to figure it out, because I don't want you to figure it out." And he goes, "He told me really fast, but I was still able to figure it out anyway." And, you know, I think that's really interesting. And that kind of actually dovetails nicely into, I've talked about the Scratch documentary before.
Yeah.
This isn't really producing, but it kind of borders on producing. There's a scene in that documentary where they're having, and this was done in like the late 90s, early 2000s. There's a scene in this documentary where they're all at Q*bert's house, very famous DJ, and they're having like a DJ jam session, and it's like all these DJs are there, and DJ Shadow, Q*bert, like all these other cats, like Invisible Scratch Pickles, like all those cats were there, and like Rock Rada and all the, and DJ Shadow said, you know, there's this stigma in you know, making this kind of music where, you know, you want to be the only one doing it. And he was like, this community feels the exact opposite. Like, we're trying to push this art form forward, so we want to show you exactly how we do everything we do, because we want you to do it better than us, you know, which I thought was really interesting. Like, it was more about like the art form and the evolution of it than yourself, you know. And I think that correlates to producing in some aspects when it comes to just producing music. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think, one thing you could say is that while producers traditionally can be a little secretive, I think there's the other side of it where they also have, and good producers have a breadth of understanding of music. So I think just like any other artist, they've got a debt to the people that came before them and kind of a responsibility to the people who come after them.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like DJ Shadow and guys like that understand that. You know? Which
I think they understood they were working within an art form that was new relative to everything else, you know? Like, DJ culture and scratching, it had only been around for, 25 years at that point, 20 years?
Right.
You know? It's not like they were making, you know, rock music that had been around since the 50s or jazz that had been around since, like, whatever, you know? You know, this was something that was kind of brand new when you think about the lifespan of different genres of music, you know?
Right. That's cool, man. I gotta check that out sometime.
It's really good.
We
should watch it sometime, yeah.
We should do like a movie review sometime.
We do need to do that, yeah.
Well, look for it in season 5, guys. We've got, so who are some of you, let's just throw some names out and maybe talk about some producers who have a signature sound. I mentioned Phil Spector earlier. Yeah. Let's talk about Spector, because he's a good example of an early producer who still has a sound that's connected to him. So Phil Spector is a guy in the 60s. He worked with a lot of girl groups. he developed something called the wall of sound.
Yeah.
And the wall of sound is it's one of those great rock and roll maximalist things where it's like, hey, if one drummer's good, 3 drummers is better. You know?
Yeah.
Let's get some, 4 people playing castanets and a bunch of xylophones and basically all playing together in this huge reverby room.
Right.
And so if you know songs like The Crystals, The Do Run Run, or
Baby Love, and that's him.
That's not him. That's Motown. But that's so he wasn't a Motown guy. So he would have been like Be My Baby is what you're thinking of.
Oh, that is what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah, Be My Baby by the Ronettes. That big sort of cavernous sound where it sounds like, well, it almost sounds like a rock and roll orchestra.
Yeah, kind of.
Like he was the one, kind of the one to perfect that.
Yeah.
And so that's still assigned to him. Now he's a terrible human being.
Yeah. Let's just press. Yeah.
Always been a terrible human being, and then was involved in allegedly in a murder. So and I think he was convicted for it. So so not somebody you want to emulate,
right?
But somebody who is a great example of a producer who developed a sound, worked with multiple artists, and gave them that sound.
Right.
He recorded All Things Must Pass with George Harrison.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So he continued to work for a long time. He recorded End of the Century with the Ramones.
Really?
Yeah. So I think it's their 4th or 5th album.
No way.
Yeah. So do you remember Rock and Roll Radio? That song?
Of course. That's
him.
him.
Yeah. That's him.
Wow.
Yeah. Which makes sense. Like even if you hear the sound of it, some people aren't crazy about the production on that, but he's definitely a guy who like has a bag of tricks that he brings to everything.
Yeah.
You know? So if you work with Phil Spector or worked with him,
right.
If you work with him now, you're probably doing prison tattoos. But if you worked with him back then, you knew what you were getting kind of going into it. It was some version of that wall of sound.
Hold that thought. I'm going to go grab some more food. We'll be right back.
I'm eating some beets right now. B-E-E-T-S, not B-E-A-T-S. Write us at aotypodcast at gmail.com if you got that reference.
So I did not realize Phil Spector had a kind of late career renaissance kind of deal. That's kind of interesting.
He was always a guy that like people went back to when they were looking for a very kind of classic sound. Yeah. And like something like the Ramones. I mean, we'll eventually talk about the link between the Ramones and girl groups and bubblegum music and the way that influenced punk rock. But the point is that it may sound a little strange to think of this 60s producer working with the Ramones, but when you do the math, it all works. It makes sense. It's not so strange. Yeah. But I think Phil Spector is a great example of like a guy on that one extreme where it's like his goal is, if you work with him, the goal is to create a Phil Spector album, kind of. With you. I think the other side is that there are producers who are chameleons. I know like Rick Rubin, say what you will about him, his attitude about producing is always to try to present the band in a specific way. And so while you have certain tricks that you could kind of say, that kind of sounds like a specific Rick Rubin production. Yeah. He's not really trying to put his fingerprints all over stuff. At least that's not his goal.
I think his goal was kind of like, I'm going to be a guiding light, and my guiding light is going to get something special out of each artist or band that I work with,
Yeah, but like if he's working with Weezer, it's not going to sound like License to Ill, you know what I mean? Exactly. It's not like he's coming in with that very specific thing,
No, it's funny because me and Mike, my buddy Mike, were talking once, and he was like, yeah, man, when Rick Rubin went into the studio with Johnny Cash, I'm sure he just let Johnny Cash do whatever he wanted. It was just like, okay, Mr. Cash, we'll record this. And I was like, I don't think that's how it went, man. Like, Rick Rubin got something special out of Johnny because he's Rick Rubin.
Yeah, well, I mean, he really encouraged that. I've seen footage of it, where it was kind of Rick Rubin's idea to do that stripped down thing. Now, ultimately, he's not doing a bunch of crazy production flourishes on it. Yeah. But that's the other thing about the producer. They're kind of the leader in the studio. And so, I mean, not to compare myself to Rick Rubin here for a second, but there was a time Steph and I talked about me being her producer sometimes because we recorded stuff together. So she's got a song called Providence. I mean, it's one of her most beautiful songs, and we recorded it.
What's it called?
It's called Providence.
Providence, okay.
And we recorded it, just her and me. Like Dolph wasn't there. He just didn't happen to be there that day. And I set the mics up and all the engineering stuff. And the way we produced that particular track was just her with a guitar and her singing it. And she did a performance, and then we, it wasn't what we wanted, but it was close, and we talked about it. And it's something that was just like kind of almost being a coach, like coaching it out of it. And I think Rick Rubin has that ability.
He does, for sure,
Like, but eventually with me and Steph, we got like a performance that was right on. Like she knew when to push it, when to hold back. And it was an honest performance, but it was also going for the things that she and I had talked about. So after 7 or 8 takes, we got that perfect take, but it wouldn't have happened. And this is not me just patting myself on the back. She said, like, that wouldn't have happened, that recording, which we were really proud of and still are, wouldn't have happened without me being there to coach her through that. So that's sometimes the role of the producer. And different producers take that side of it more seriously than others. I don't think you would expect Phil Spector to be that kind of nurturing producer. You know what I mean? He's going to say, shut up, here come the castanet players, and let's do this.
Here come the 3 drummers.
Yeah.
They're all going to play in time, and you're going to sing over it.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, be my baby, Bump, bump, bump.
And unfortunately, sometimes that hard-headedness ends up making some really great music, really great art, But
and that's why there's not one way to be a great
It doesn't
producer.
have to be that way. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I mean, all things being equal, no one wants to work with a diva producer. But, if that's the sound you're going for and they know how to get it, then hallelujah, a good producer can be a godsend.
Exactly.
There are definitely terrible albums that are well produced.
What's an example of that? Nickelback.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of. To be honest with you, I admire some of the production on a lot of like 2000s pop hits that I otherwise hate. Like where the songs are obsequious and boring and the melodies just blah or whatever.
Yeah.
But you can hear some song like Backstreet's Back, and you hear that or whatever, and it's like, well, that is kind of a pretty damn
good.
cool line, I would never want to listen to this song, but it's clearly put together over a reasonable groove, and it's mixed really well. And
when I was doing research on Odelay for the last episode, I was reading some about the Dust Brothers, and they talked about how they became kind of like these pop mercenaries in a way, and they producing Hanson and all this stuff.
Yeah,
and
right.
The author of the article said, as crazy as it sounds, you can hear little traces of the Dust Brothers in songs like LFO's Summer Girls, which I thought was hilarious and kind of true. Like, it's kind
that
of
song
weird.
is so bad.
No, it's terrible.
But they end up having an influence on it. Yeah, Dust Brothers is another set of producers who have, we think of having a very signature sound, a very I guess I've been using the phrase cut and paste, but like tons of sampling and stuff like that.
Right.
I don't know where they're at these days though, because sampling still happens, but you can't do 30 samples in a song anymore. You know what I mean?
The states have gotten pretty savvy about clearing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So maybe this might be a topic you may not want to approach in this episode, but what do you think of different we kind of talked about production technique and how different producers use it in a different way. How do you feel about different production gear, whether you're like a lo-fi or a hi-fi? Like you have somebody like Jack White and Steve Albini who are really big on recording to tape and not doing anything digital, and then there's also producers on the very other end of the spectrum. That's one of the dudes that made a bunch of beats on Kendrick Lamar's new album made them all on his iPhone. So.
I've told you this before. I don't think I've ever said this on the podcast, but I am not a process guy. I don't really care how an album is made. I care about the final product in the end.
Right.
I don't pretend that I can really hear that much of a difference between something recorded on analog tape in the traditional process and something recorded digitally. If something is crap, it's a 128, and all that. Like, you can hear if it's over compressed or terrible. But I'm not super precious about that. Sometimes, working around guys who, I hate to say this, but in musician and production circles, there is a strain of conservatism. It's like, this is the way not political conservatism, but like, where they're saying, this is the way we've always done it. Yeah. This is what I'm used to hearing. This is what I know how to do. I don't want to learn some new process just to do something that I know how to do the old-fashioned way. So I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way. And I'm going to turn that, I'm going to fetishize the old-fashioned process because because that's what I know.
Right.
And so I guess if you're going to say, are you like a classicalist or a futurist or whatever, I guess put me down in the futurist category.
Yeah.
If everybody's going to do, but to me, it's whatever process you use to capture that moment of inspiration or some inspired idea is fine with me. And we can worry about the, samples per second, the bit rate of the process or whether or not it's analog or whatever. That stuff is interesting, but it doesn't affect my enjoyment of the final music. I guess what I'm saying is a great song recorded on an iPhone is fine with me. Yeah. A great song recorded in Electric Ladyland Studios on analog tape, reel to reel, is also fine with me.
Well, that's a good answer. And it's honestly not far off from what I thought you would say, but it made me think of something else. Do you feel that like people like Jack White and Steve Albini, do you feel like they have fetishized, traditional recording processes in favor of digital? And if so, do you think that's good or bad or indifferent or whatever?
I guess I'd say indifferent. Have they fetished it? I think a little bit. Yeah. But I think it works for them. You know what I mean? If Albini, making music is like, really making art is about making choices. Yeah. And sometimes that's choices in the medium that you use. Just like a sculptor chooses to use clay or stone, and a painter decides to use paint.
Watercolor.
Watercolor, sure. A musician or a producer might choose tape over digital processes, and I think that's fine. Jack himself, uses a Digitex whammy pedal a lot to get the low end stuff. Yeah. And he even said at one point, he's like, because people have said to him, that's a completely digital effect. Yeah. Why would you use that if you otherwise are so against digital stuff? And he literally said, well, I kind of like having this to just as a check that I'm not fetishizing the process too much. Really? You know what I mean? Like that if it works, I'm still open to it. Yeah. And so I don't want to make an accusation that these guys are like just totally kidding themselves or anything like that. And I don't think it's bad. I think it's an artistic choice. But I think if Albini was here today and I told him, hey, check out my album, and if he said, well, I like it, but you recorded it all wrong because you used a MacBook, I'd be like, hey, if you want to offer me studio time, Steve,
I'll come to Chicago.
I'll come to Chicago, but otherwise, I work with the tools I got. Like that's a dumb thing to argue, to criticize. I think.
Well, and I think Jack White is kind of moving away from the traditional approach, even if it's a little bit. Like he's playing like an Eddie Van Halen guitar now and stuff, and like he has done some digital stuff on his most recent record that just came out. But
I guess I think that whether it's specific to Jack or Steve Albini, like those guys may be exceptions. There definitely are people out there, and I know some, who are who like the old methods because they're tried and true, and it is a conservative thing.
Like a lot of times, they're going to get, maybe.
Yeah, well, they know what they're going to get, but it's the right style choice for them. You know what I mean? It's like, sure. And I think that's unnecessary. Yeah. But it's up to them. If they can create great music with it and they don't mind the extra steps that it takes to create it, then so be it. But I'm not going to, when people trash on, we've talked a lot about SoundCloud rappers, but the thing I love the most about SoundCloud rappers is their kind of ingenuity. Yeah, it's kind of like figure out a way to make it, make something that qualifies as self-expressive, just using the tools they've got.
Yeah. No, I agree with you there. I do too.
I envy it just because we worked so hard when I was a teenager to try to get those tools. Yeah. And cobble those tools together when they really weren't like the technology wasn't
there yet.
So we had all these trying to record tracks, through crappy microphones that, and rigging up stereo systems to record stuff,
Yeah.
But I'll say this, the flip side is I don't think something has to be well produced to be good. I like lo-fi music a lot.
Yeah.
I went through a period, you and I have talked about recently, where I listened to nothing but outsider music for a very long period of time. And a lot of that stuff is totally recorded on cassette tapes or 4-tracks or totally trash production techniques, and yet it adds a certain charm.
Agreed.
But that's what I mean when I say I'm not process oriented. I'm much more interested in the end result.
Yeah.
Sometimes the process can inform how you hear that end result.
Yeah.
But unless it's like, this is Daniel Johnston recording on a cassette tape of a chord organ that he rigged up on a weight bench in his garage. Unless it's, that's literally true. Like
literally, that's what he did.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Like unless it's something like that where the process adds its own charm, I don't care if something was recorded in a real 4-inch tape or not. Why would I?
Exactly. Yeah, that's fair.
What about you, man? Do you feel? Let me turn that
I like
around.
both. Yeah, I think I'm kind of with you. Like, if it sounds cool, it sounds cool, and there's a lot of different ways that you can make it sound good. And who am I to tell you that like someone that just made beats on their iPhone is any less worthy of making good music than someone that records reel to reel, straight to tape.
Now I will say this: there is one thing though. Each process has its own challenges because if you're recording stuff on an iPhone, it's very easy to come up with stuff that just sounds like something anybody can make.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there are definitely times where you've got, and that's something you notice too, even listening to outsider music, is how frequently like techniques that are radical 5 years ago, like someone develops a software package to create them, and then suddenly everybody's doing it.
Yeah.
So you can hear like, what's her name? There's this artist, I think it's Debbie something. Anyway, she does a song called Get Down Goblin. Have you ever heard that?
No.
Oh my god.
Is it outsider stuff?
It's outsider stuff for sure, but it's using kind of like that. We've talked about the DX7 kind of sound.
Yeah, I'm idea those like bells. Ugh.
Yeah, that sort of sound that you heard on everything in the 80s. And I think I don't know when she's doing this, I don't know what her whole story is, but the point is like, here's a sound that was probably really like, that sounded very modern and new in 1984 or 85, that sounded just completely trash by the time she gets a hold of it in 1991, 92. And it's funny to hear how like, I guess what I'm trying to say is, if the problem with digital, one of the challenges of digital production is that it makes it very easy to repeat cliches. Yeah. And that makes your music sound way worse.
Right.
So.
Right. Like, basically like, well, I have all this, I have like a software pack that has all these Aphex Twin or, Chemical Brothers effects, and like, I can just remake that shit for years and years and years, and there's nothing new about that.
Right, and if you had all that stuff when it didn't exist, because they were building it from scratch in 1997 or something, then you probably would have been the next, Prodigy or something.
Yeah.
But if you're cobbling all that together in 2007, you just sound cliche.
But some people take those limitations and they break through them and make something even more artistic than the original person did.
And that's
I
a true
think
artist.
you can speak to that when it comes to sampling.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree with that. And that's why that's a good argument against being too conservative about this stuff. Because there is always a DJ Shadow who could pop up out of nowhere and you go, oh my God, yes, he's reconnecting ideas that already maybe existed somewhere, but he's reconnecting them in a way that is fascinating, and interesting to listen to on its own. So.
For sure. Well, cool, man. Well, what do you think? You ready to hit it? It's about that time.
So, other producers that are worth noting.
Other producers that are worth noting?
Yeah, what are some other ones that you think of?
That's a good question.
I'd say these are some of your favorites. Brian Eno?
Yeah.
Eno, of course, starts out as he is an artist himself.
Yeah, it's arguably said that he's the person that created ambient music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even know if that's arguable. Music for
I mean, I think that's pretty much, seen as true at this point. Oh, sorry, man.
It's all right.
Just had to get
Of course, he was
stuff.
important in the story of Roxy music and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And very important in the history of U2. One of my favorite albums, Achtung Baby.
You did that one?
Produced by Brian Eno.
That makes perfect sense. Listening to that album.
Yeah, like
that Coldplay record he did is actually really, really
Viva
good.
La Vida.
Yeah. There's a song on there called, I think I brought it up, Strawberry Swing.
Yeah, I don't know this one.
It's quite possibly the best Coldplay song. I'm not really the biggest Coldplay fan.
Yeah, I'm not either.
I dated a girl and that was her favorite band, so I listened to a lot of them then.
That's harsh.
Well, it's better than Nickelback.
Yeah, I guess that's true. There's worse. To me, the thing I always said about Coldplay was that they weren't as bad as everyone said, and they weren't as good as everyone said. It was like the people who loved them thought they were
the
next evolution of rock,
mm-hmm.
and the people who hated them treated them like they were some terrible musical abortion.
Yeah.
When in fact,
which
they were
neither
just
is
kind of
really
okay.
true.
Neither is true. They're just kind of I think the problem wasn't that Coldplay was out there doing whatever they were doing. It's that there weren't other bands that were better than Coldplay. You know what I mean? Like it was kind of Coldplay being one of the biggest bands in the world was a problem with how we choose the biggest band in the world. Not a problem necessarily with Coldplay themselves.
People thought they were kind of the people thought they were the new U2.
David Frick said that.
Mm-hmm.
I remember in his review of, I think it's in his review of Rush of Blood to the Head. He literally said, blah, 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 and Coldplay's the next U2. And I was like...
Did that piss you off?
No, it made me buy the album because I was like, okay, let's find out. This is supposed to be the next U2. And to be honest with you, half of that album is pretty good.
Yeah,
well... And the other half is okay.
Parachute sounds like Britpop.
Yeah, Parachute sound like Blur.
Like a light Blur album.
Yellow. The first time I heard Yellow, I was that made
Blur
me angry
rip-off,
because I had been like trying to get people to listen to Blur forever.
Yeah, now all of a sudden,
and then Blur at that point
this
it
was
video releasing
of a guy on
13.
A beach. Yeah. 13 came out around that time.
Yeah, so Blur had walked away from this sort of pop sound, and then Coldplay came along and did essentially a Blur knockoff song. And it was an enormous international hit.
Yeah, I know. God damn.
So that was frustrating, but it was mostly frustrating because it's like, oh, now you guys like this sound. After I've been trying to get you to listen to it for 5 fucking years, now you like it all of a sudden. Okay. Yeah. But that's not, that's whatever.
I think, so if we're talking about, again, let's talk about producers, Damon Albarn.
Yeah, I think Damon Albarn is definitely like especially now, that is an interesting story when an artist kind of moves from being an artist and they learn from a producer. And he worked with Stephen Street for years. Stephen Street, one of the great producers of the 80s and 90s, worked with the Smiths, famously. Sure. So he's the Smiths producer, Blur's producer, the Cranberries producer.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so he's...
Stephen Street?
Stephen Street is his name. Yeah, he's another one of those who doesn't have a big sonic signature, but most of what he works on is really great.
Yeah.
But so Damon sort of learns from him.
Right.
And then he kind of becomes a super producer in his own right. Although he really just produces his own stuff. It's just that with the Gorillaz, that means he's producing lots of different artists along with it. So he's got De La Soul in there, and he worked with Tina Weymouth, and he's worked with, all kinds of different... And he's worked with other folks, too. Like, I think, doesn't Danger Mouse did one of them? And what's the guy's name? Dan the Automator. So he's worked with a lot of producers that have helped him get that sound. But he's certainly a big part of that. He's not just an artist who shows up and stands what the producer tells him to.
Agreed. And the songs he sings on, whatchamacallit, on the Gorillaz albums, I think sound really good. It sounds like it's the lead singer of Blur is actually singing on this song.
Well, I feel like that was kind of in the more recent Gorillaz albums, that's been the thing that I miss. I understand, I haven't listened to the Now yet, which is his most recent.
I haven't either.
But I'm told that he sings a little bit more on it. But I know in Humans, that was... he's got Mavis Staples there, one of the greatest singers of all time.
With Pusha T. And oh my God, that song's so good.
That is really great. I'm never going to complain about an album that has Mavis Staples singing on it, But I did feel like, I just kind of wish that he was singing a little bit more. So.
Yeah. Who's the guy that produced Amy Winehouse? What is his name?
I've seen interviews with him.
God, it's gonna bug me.
It's not Ethan Johns, is it?
No. What the fuck is his name? Can I?
I heard him talking about how they wrote Rehab.
Yeah.
That Amy was saying to him. She said she just said to him she had a fight with her dad or something on the phone, and then afterwards she said he tried to make me go to rehab. I said no, and he was like, whoa, that sounded like a.
That's a song.
That's a song. You need to go write that song. Yeah. That goes back to the idea of the producer too, as someone who kind of has an ear for what the artist is trying to achieve as an artist.
Mark Ronson.
Mark Ronson. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Because I was Mick Ronson, also a great producer. Yeah. Mick Ronson. Yeah. This is Mark Ronson. Yeah.
For sure. Wonder if they're related.
Yeah.
But yeah, he has a couple of songs that he tried to sing on, and there was like Terry Gross, I think, interviewed him. I was listening to it one night on NPR, and he was like, "Yeah, I don't really care for my singing voice, but it still sounds pretty good. It sounds kind of like he's trying to do a Damon Albarn thing, but not in a shitty way. But he's just like, I'm better as a producer. It's like this Ghostface Killah song that he did where he sang the hook and Ghost rapped a couple of verses, and I don't know. I love
that about that's one thing that the role of the producer can really do is that someone who's not doesn't want to be out in front of this thing or doesn't maybe have the face for it or the I mean, there's a lot of reasons why someone might thrive more as a producer than as an artist.
Right.
And I think it's one of the things that kind of where I disagree with some basic punk values. Punk is often very do it yourself, right? Which I agree with, but it often means that people are literally taking on the production duties themselves and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think there is a space in popular music. There should be a space for someone who's like a 50-year-old balding dude who is also happens to be a music genius to be able to create music that people will hear.
Right.
And I think that if you happen to be that 55-year-old balding musical genius, get into music production. There's space for you.
A lot of punk, like super punk stuff that, those guys, they don't really care about, exploring. They just care about, this guitar tone sounds good, so I'm going to use this guitar tone on every album. And as a result, you have bands like Propagandhi and Pennywise, and, they end up making the same album every year and a half. Just different, and it's just like, guys, you've done this before. But that's okay. I mean, that's what they want to do, and they have a fan base that will appreciate that, I suppose, but I don't know.
But I think we would both, just putting our music critic hat on, I think while it's somewhat admirable to find a signature and stick with it, the AC/DC Ramones approach.
Husker Du, stuff like that.
Yeah, there are bands that do that, but I think it's better when you evolve, and so usually it's best if you start there and then you work your way to something else.
Right.
And so that's what I look for.
Yeah.
Usually. Then again, I'll get down on some Ramones albums. That's
of course, yeah. So. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Any other producers right here as we wrap up?
I'm sure there are.
I mean, we didn't talk about George Martin much. One thing that I wanted to add about him, he's a famous Beatles producer.
Yeah.
Part of what's great about George Martin, and it goes back to the traditional role of the producer, is he's a great orchestral arranger, too.
Yeah.
And there are guys like that, Andrew Loog Oldham and stuff, who produced the Rolling Stones, who, a big part of his role is to, take the sound and come up with a sympathetic French horn part to go with For No One or something, And that is another way that a producer can
using
contribute.
An instrument like a mellotron,
Yeah, hey, what you're looking for here, let's get a pump organ in here, because that's going to get the sound you want on benefit of Mr. Kite. One time George Martin literally cut up a bunch of analog tapes of carousel music, threw it all up in the air and taped it together in a crazy way.
It's kind of like a sample almost.
Yeah, but almost like a crazy cut and paste Stockhausen tape experiment, and that's what you hear at the end for the benefit of Mr. Kite. So, so
it's pretty cool.
So, it's arrangements are a part of what they do too.
Sure.
What's up, Paul?
That's pretty cool, man. Well,
Well,
I like this one. What did you think?
I thought it was pretty good, man.
Me too,
It's
man.
always fun to talk about that, you know, as much as I said I'm not a process guy, a lot of times it is fun to talk about how music is
I don't know.
made.
I think you kind of are a process guy, Kris. I think you're like, I mean, and I don't say that as a diss.
No, I know.
I don't know. You're methodical.
Yeah.
Much more so than I am. I'm a fly by the seat of your pants kind of guy.
Well, I guess what I'd say is it's not that I'm not interested. When I say I'm not interested in process, that's not really true.
Okay.
But I'm not interested.
You're not emphasizing process.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Process
Does
isn't more
that make
important
more
to
sense?
me than the end result.
Okay.
If you can make Bohemian Rhapsody, if I found out Bohemian Rhapsody was made via time machine, maybe Timbaland brought it with him and dropped it off on a MacBook, it wouldn't take anything away from Bohemian Rhapsody.
Okay, that's fair.
You know what I mean?
That makes sense, I guess. I might have been thinking of it in a different way.
Yeah, I do think it is amazing that Timbaland has become our podcast version of Doctor Who. I think that's great.
Me too, man. Well, all right. Well,
on that note, see you later.
On that note, it's been real, you guys. We will see you again soon. And, go ahead and wrap this guy up, tie it up with a bow.